Thank you all, first of all, for being here. It's really awesome that you're all here right after the keynote. So, firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Jaap Komans. I live and work in the Netherlands. I work for Group 9, and I'm a Java developer, software architect. I've been doing Java ever since 2002, professionally since 2006. And outside work, I'm a husband, I'm a father to 2 girls, and I'm a board playing gamer. I love playing board games with friends, colleagues. But enough about me. Let's jump to the modules. Before we start diving into the subject, let's have a brief look at where we are with modules today. So first of all, tool support is pretty good. Maven supported modules from the very beginning. All IDEs have proper support for modules. I've been told that Gradle works very well with modules as well. I don't know it from personal experience, but from that perspective, we can work with modules today, and we had that possibility for the past 2 years. It's been 2 years since they were introduced already, so for that part, it's good. But then we come to another important ingredient of our day-to-day developer life, and that's frameworks and libraries. And the adoption of modules amongst frameworks and libraries, common open source libraries, is still rather low. There's some libraries that are fully modular, but that's very sparse amount. And there's some that took some actions to be compatible with modules, but most are not there, don't even have a roadmap, or don't even care. Then about us, developers, adoption amongst us, that's really very low. Just from personal experience, I've been doing this talk before, and I did a project on modules, which I will come back to later. A little more than a year ago, so I had a lot of conversations about modules with other developers, and I haven't met one outside that project that really put it into action already. So, of course, I don't know all developers, but my personal experience is the adoption is very low. And then the question is, what is holding us back? And for that, I got a nice analogy from Sander Mark. Happy to see him here in the room today. He said, well, modules are like eating your veggies. You know it's good for you, but, well, is it fun? So I did a little experiment at home. These are my kids. And as you can see, they're not rather happy. But contrary to what you might think, it's not because there's veggies on their plate. It's because there's too little veggies on their plate. Because they're like me, a little odd, but I like my veggies. I like my modules. And now you might think, why? Why do you like modules? And for that, I want to take you back a little bit in time. A little more than a year ago, I started at a new client. And that client had a big legacy application, 1 million lines of code, 10 teams working on it, 10 years of legacy. And on the first day, they handed me a nice architecture overview. It was something like this, not exactly, of course, but it was structured. Not my favorite type of architecture. They sort of had some legacy within the legacy that was separated out. There was a legacy framework nicely separated out in the picture. Of course, first they learned that reality was more like this. So, more modules involved and more dependencies especially. And that's to be expected when you enter such a big legacy project. But the surprise for me came after a while of working on this product. More and more, I came to realize that there were more dependencies than this. There were runtime dependencies, mostly through reflection, and they weren't nice. they were creating cyclic dependencies amongst the modules. There were actually reflective calls from the persistence layer back to the controller layer or to the service layer. And that made it very hard to maintain, and it was very unstructured. This was actually the first and only project in my career so far where I just stopped doing a simple refactoring after a week of trying to get it done. I just dropped it. It was plain impossible. And luckily, we got a blank sheet for a next step, because the client was rolling out a new platform, and our team was lucky enough to be the first team to develop an application for that platform. So it was Kubernetes-based. The only thing we inherited was a small proof of concept, Spring Boot application based on Java 8. And I realized that there was a little bit of an issue with maintaining structure and maintaining the architecture within this organization. And I thought, well, okay, we're here. We had some room to experiment. Let's see if we can pull it off to make a modular application out of this and migrate it to Java 11 and go from there. So what I'm going to show you today is loosely based on what I did for that client. But of course, I can't use the real use case, so I'm doing something that's closer to me. I'll create an application around board games. So it's a really simple application. You can enter some data of a board game. There's a REST API. You can request it. And I also want to have ratings for board games, because I'm currently the only user, it's not that exciting. So I decided to get my ratings from Board Game Geek. For those who are not into board games, Board Game Geek is the biggest website on board games, and it has information about every board game in the world. And it also happens to expose an XML API, so that's useful for me. So this is the architecture that I'm after. This is actually the module graph. So at the very bottom, you see the domain module, which has no external dependencies, just domain classes. Then there are three modules that are more boundary modules. So there's a persistence module with Spring Data Mongo. There's the REST API module with Spring MVC. And there's the Board Game Geek client, which uses JXB and OpenVane. And of course, I want my application to be secure, so I have a security module. It's using Spring Security and JWT for JWT tokens. And to tie it all together, there's the application module. That's a Spring Boot application, hence the title of my talk. Unfortunately, this wasn't exactly what I ended up with, because originally the project I did was with Spring Data JPA and DB2 database. But I thought, well, DB2 on a conference, that's not too good of a story, so let's use Mongo. Let's make it a little more exciting. But as it turns out, Spring Data Mongo quite heavily relies on the classic Mongo client, which has a split package issue, which is a no-go for modules. So I had to drop that. So sorry for that. It's back to Spring Data JPA. It's now Postgres. Which brings me to what are actually the challenges that we will face when migrating this application. Well, first of all, as already mentioned, there are split packages. A split package is a package with the same name being exposed by different modules. You might say, okay, that's not too big of a problem. Probably I won't run into that. But just imagine your favorite bigger framework or library that split across multiple jars. Mostly they share a common base package. So as soon as there's classes and interfaces in that base package, you will run into trouble. So this is a very likely scenario. And the next one is even more of a challenge, are automatic modules. So a little refresher for those who forgot or haven't heard, automatic modules. An automatic module is a jar file, a classic jar file being interpreted by the JVM as a module. And it uses some rules for that. So first of all, it exports and opens all its packages. And second of all, it reads all other modules. And up until here, this is not too big of an issue. This is just the behavior we always had. So nothing unexpected here. The challenge is actually in the module name. The module name of an automatic module, by default, is derived from the file name. And again, you might say, well, that will not be too big of an issue. Well, there's some stuff stripped off from the file name. And to illustrate the size of the problem, Robert Scholte from Apache Maven Foundation did a little research for himself, and he found 3,500 possible collisions in Maven Central. Now, the top one was parent, which obviously isn't too big of an issue. But the runner-up is library, and that sounds like something I want to have in my application as a dependency. So luckily, there's a little bit of a workaround. You can include an automatic module name in the manifest file of your jar. So that makes it possible to reserve a module name for later, when you really start adopting modules. And that makes it possible to create a unique module name. And what you see in general is that people opt to use a reverse DNS, like we do with packages and with Maven group IDs. So, enough of the theory. Let's get started. What did I do to migrate my application? Well, first of all, upgrade your dependencies. Of course, there's security, there's support issues that might lead you to upgrade your dependencies. But as I said, the adoption is still rather low, but it is progressing over time. So by upgrading all your dependencies to the latest versions, you might just resolve a problem that you would have with an older version. So next step, run your application with JDK 11 or higher. Again, this is a step to reduce the size of the eventual problem. And in this case, JXB was removed from JDK in 11, so I had to find myself an external dependency to fill in for that. Then step 3, compile with JDK 11 or higher. Again, reducing the size of the problem. You will probably not run into too much issues in this step. I didn't run into any, but it's good to do that before you move on with modules. Then this is an important one, and this is also a deviation from what I actually did in practice at first. So first, prepare your module structure. If your application is not yet structured as modules, this is a good time to start making that structure visible. So, for instance, make separate Maven modules out of them. In the project that I did, we didn't do this. We started out and we had one big, well, not too big, but it was one application, one Maven module. We said, well, let's make that a module first, and then we'll figure out the rest later and split it up later on. But by that, we took on all the problems with the migration at once, which brings me to step 5. Step 5 is start adding module descriptors bottom up. So start at the very bottom of your module graph. And that's what I want to show you, because yeah, this is really representing the experience I had when doing this. So let's make that a little more readable. So we see here is the structure of the application. There's application module, the board game geek client, domain, persistence, REST API, security. just like you saw in the picture. And at the bottom of the module graph is domain. So let's start there. So new module descriptor. And I want my module name to be unique, so I do reverse DNS. And it's not really exciting module, so there's some classes in there in 2 packages. And as these are being used throughout my application, it makes sense to export both these packages. So there we go. We have our first module. Now let's see if we can make this work. Oh. Let's see if it builds. Oops. First problem already. So scrolling up here, you see a lot of stuff. Let's see if we, so it says here something about forking, Surefire. Took me a little while, but apparently there's a bug in Surefire in combination with modules and JUnit Jupyter. Luckily, there's a milestone version of Surefire that resolves that issue. So let's go fix that. So yes, import changes. And let's run it again. Okay, cool. So it's building now. So let's see if we can also run it. Oh, it was already running, sorry. Okay, starting. Oh, that looks good. So now let's give you a little tour of the application. It's really simple. First of all, I need to log in to get a token. So let's see, it's working. I got my token. Then the database is empty because I told JPA to rebuild it at every start. So I will now post a new game to the database and response, got a new game. Cool. As you see here, there's the BoardGameGeek ID, which I use to get the ratings through a separate endpoint. So if I now try to do this, this is actually going through BoardGameGeek, and to prove that this is correct, I have the corresponding page here open. Well, okay, maybe if I reload this. No, okay, there's a little bit of a rounding issue, but you see, I'm more accurate. Good. So we have one module. That's really nice. Now let's hop on to the next. So new module descriptor. I won't bore you with doing all that. I prepared myself a little descriptor here. Okay, I'm a little too enthusiastic there. So what you see here, again, module name, and it requires the domain module because the domain classes are in the API of this module. Then it requires Java XML bind, that's JXB. It requires fain core, fain JXB, and it exports only one package. That's a factory package, where the factory class is that creates the instances that are in other packages that I don't want to expose, actually. But JXB requires some access to do deep reflection on the XML API, so I have to open this XML API package for JXB. So let's see if it now still works. And immediately we run into a new trouble. Okay, so there's a module not found, that's too bad, and there's a whole range of these. It says the unnamed module reads package comson XML bind from both JXB impl and JXB core. So apparently, there's a split package issue in the current version of JXB. This too has been resolved, but it is only a build version that's available, and that has to do with the whole Jakarta EE migration. So there's no official version of JXB 2.4 yet. But there's a build version available in Maven Central, and it's fairly stable. So I'm using that. Let's see here. I can replace all this with just this. Okay. Now run it again. Run it again. So there we go, it started. Let's briefly prove that it all still works. So I have to log in, create myself a board game, and then this was the module for the board game geek client, so let's see if this still works. And it does. So we're good there. Now, there's of course more modules, so let's continue. Persistence. Create a new module descriptor. And here you see it again requires the domain module. It requires Java persistence, that's JPA. It requires Spring Data JPA, Spring transaction for my transactions. And then it exports, I think it's only package. Yeah, it's only package. And also it opens the package for deep reflection. And what you see here, I didn't do that in the previous module. I specifically say here, okay, I want to open it to Hibernate and to Spring Core. Meaning that other modules are not allowed to use deep reflection on my module. So it gives me a little bit of control of who can access my, my stuff. Okay, let's move on. Where are we? Rests. So this is a really simple one. It requires the domain module. It only requires Spring Web as an external dependency, and then it exports its only package. Okay, let's move on. Security. So here you see this already has a lot more dependencies, but mostly it's Spring. And what you might also notice is, as I said before, most libraries choose reverse DNS. Spring doesn't do that, but Spring has an automatic module name in all its jars. So it's really, really good that they did that, and I think Spring is one of the few that has the right to say, okay, we're just Spring. There's no competition for that. Then it also requires, JWT, and for some reason I also ran into embedded Tomcat that was required here. I didn't dig into the details. I just found out it required that, so I added it. Then it exports it's both of its packages, so the core of the security module and the REST API that's belonging to that. So you just have to believe me here, it still runs. I won't bother you with proving it because I want to proceed. You might say you missed one module, and that's true. But the application module is a separate step, and I will try to explain why. Because up until now, I've been cheating a little. I have module descriptors everywhere, and Maven and IntelliJ say, okay, you're using module descriptors, we're acting like these are modules. But I'm not really running on the module path yet. So the next step will be adding a module descriptor to my main jar, which will make sure that we actually run on the module path, which will cause us to run into new trouble that we didn't run into yet, because now we will run into the reflection issues. So expect a little bit of a bumpy ride. It's just one module descriptor, but it will take a lot more effort. Good, there we go. Application. This is a little bit different than the others, of course. As you see here, it requires most of the other modules. Then there's Java Instrument for bytecode instrumentation. There's Spring Boot auto configure, Spring Beans, Spring Context. Then it exports both packages. The one has the application class, and the other has the Java Spring configuration. And it also opens both of these packages to Spring Core. Spring Core does require deep reflection on that. So let's see what we get now. Oh, no, first, I forget. I want to show you this. So now, if I open my Spring configuration class, it starts complaining. It says, okay, I need JavaX persistence here for the entity manager, because right here I'm building up my entity manager and injecting it in my beans. And there's some domain classes. And now I could resolve that by adding these directly to my module descriptor. But that's not exactly what I think is right here, because it requires JavaX persistence because it depends on my persistence module. And the same goes for the domain module. That's there just because my other modules require that. So I can solve that in a different manner. So let's go to my persistence. Sorry? Yeah. Don't give it away. So what I can say here is requires transitive, which says, okay, every module that requires my persistence module also requires my domain module. And the same goes for Java persistence. So this, in my opinion, is more correct. The domain module is required because it's part of my public API of this module. And the persistence, Java persistence module is required because this module depends on it. So now if I run it, hopefully we'll get some output. But that's not too much output. So it immediately bumps into an issue with a JWT. So let me scroll to the right. And it says here, JWT Jackson contains this package, and JWT API also exports that. And that's a split package issue. Now this one, I tried to resolve to file a PIR to the library and help the library maintainer out. And he appeared very open to the IDE, but there were some limitations in both his time and other agenda, for instance, support for Android with Java 7 background. So there's no progress there yet, but the good news is it's just 2 classes. Causing this issue, so I have a little patch prepared. Hopefully, so this just adds these 2 classes and gets rid of one of the dependencies. I won't bother you with the details. So it solves that. So just an example of what you can run into by just depending on a library. So hopefully this time we get a better result. We see the Spring banner, that's good, but that's about it. Let's see what it says. Right here it says illegal access exception, module board game security does not open board game security to module Spring Core. Okay, I forgot something. So that's actually great output I get there. So even better, I can more or less copy paste that. So it was the security module. So I need to adjust a little bit. And then I know the same applies to that package, so I'll also add that. So, next chance. Okay. Different error, which is great. So, we're a step further. Here I have to dig a little bit more, and here's the cause. It says class not found exception. So apparently there's something that depends on Java SQL. Okay, didn't spot that, so again here, let's add that to my descriptor then. So, good. Now, that should be better. And hopefully this time it will start. Too bad. Okay, this is actually one I really skipped over. So, it also requires ByteBuddy. Now, the fun thing about ByteBuddy is that's really modular, but it's still compiled with Java 8. I won't go into the details, but it uses a nice library to generate a module descriptor for Java 8. And if I now click on this, I will get that module descriptor. So that's really neat, I think. Just wanted to show that briefly. So hopefully startup errors are over now. Oh no, there's one more. No such method exception. And what you see here, there's a dynamic proxy issue with Spring for one of the constructors of one of my classes. And as it turns out, yeah, you see here Obgenesis. That's a library that allows you to construct classes without calling the constructor. So there's all dirty stuff going on down in the Spring framework. It gives me a lot of value, but it's not really neat. But there's a solution for that as well. And this is actually a module name that I really like. JDK unsupported. This really screams, you're doing something wrong here, but we allow you to do it. But it's a deliberate choice. So let's see if we now finally get it to start. And hooray, there we have it. But that's just starting the application. So let's see if it still works. First of all, log in. Okay, that's good. I got myself a token. And then do a post for a new board game. That shouldn't be too exciting. Instead, oh, oops. HTTP 415, unsupported media type. What did I do? That's not something I expected. And I actually got this in my project. And I thought, well, what's going on here? And it misled me a little. Or it misled me big time, because I thought, well, 415, I must have changed something else. There's something wrong with my code. And it really cost me 2 days. And then I realized that the answer was right in front of me. Because when we look here at the logs, there's a warning here. So, blah, 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 blah. All at the right, it says, does not open the command package to Jackson data bind. Okay. I could have seen that earlier, but as you see, sometimes you get a little bit of unexpected outcomes that will lead you astray. So luckily, I now have the solution. So let's see, it's domain. Oh, sorry for that. And again, I can more or less copy paste that. Need to adjust it a little. And the module system really gives me proper output. It's just that Spring doesn't deal with it the way I would hope it does. So let's rerun that. That's good. Now let's quickly go through this. Problem resolved, luckily. And now for the final test, does it still go? Oh, no. This is actually something, oh, I know what I did wrong, sorry. My bad. Remember that I commented something out. So that's the new JXP dependency that I added later. Was a little too quick with adding that, and I forgot it. So I owe you some proof that it works. So let's run through it again. Log in, create a board game, and now get the rating. Yes, we're there. It's all done. Our application is modular. So that's cool. But at the same time, while I was on that project, I was also very interested in Kotlin. And I thought, can I do both? Can I get both modules and Kotlin? And as it turns out, you can. Kotlin has module support since 1.3. And the way they did it is not exactly what you might initially expect, but it turns out to be really neat. Because they said, okay, the module descriptor, the module info.java, it's good as it is. So if you're doing modules with Kotlin, you will have one Java file that's your module info.java. So they kept the same thing. Which also has a nice side effect, because if you want to do mixed source, like I'm about to do now, Java and Kotlin in the same project, you have one module descriptor. So let's see if we can pull that off. I have 5 minutes. I'm hopeful. So to prove you that this works, I will take the class that's at the core of almost everything here and migrate that to Kotlin. Oh, oops, that's not what I, yes. So IntelliJ is helping me out here. Oh yeah. So there's a little bit of stuff that I won't need because it misunderstood my intentions from the Java code. So I now have a nice Kotlin class. And it says, okay, Kotlin is not configured. Oh, well, then configure it for me. Java with Maven, yeah, domain module, great. Now you see it opens the POM because it did some stuff over here. Now, unfortunately, this isn't correct because this is configuration for Kotlin only and not for mixed source, but I'm prepared for that. So this is the correct configuration. And also, another thing I want to show you is that it also did a little modification here in my module descriptor. It says now requires Kotlin standard lib. And I said in the beginning there's no external dependencies. Now you might think, okay, there's an external dependency popping in. But in the end, you also implicitly depend on Java base. And this is just the Kotlin equivalent for that. So let's go and run this. Takes a little more time because it has to compile the Kotlin stuff for the first time. But it starts. And again, to prove that it still works, I can actually stop here because it already touched the board game class, but I will go on and see if I get the rating. So everything still works. So I myself thought that was really neat. So to wrap up, I learned a couple of lessons from doing this. First of all, go bottom up. Start at the very bottom of your module graph, because that allows you to do this step by step and not take all the problems in one go. You can even spread it across sprints or iterations the way you want in that way. Second of all, test all the paths of your application on every step. As you saw during the demo, especially in step 6, when we actually started running on the module path, there's so many things that you can run into at runtime that you would not expect. So properly test everything you do during this process. And then remember, the logs have the answer. The module system actually produces proper output and throws proper exceptions with messages that you can almost copy-paste into your module descriptor. So your first gut feeling should be, look there. Like the HTTP 415 I got, it would have saved me 2 days of my time if I would have just looked at the logs first. And then finally, it still involves quite some pioneering. It's not really mature to use for all purposes. So consider for yourself, is it worth the effort for me? In this case, in this project, for me, it was definitely worth the effort. But that doesn't really mean that it is worth the effort in every next project I will start. So make the consideration yourself. I'm wrapping up. And with that, we've come at the end. You can find the code of my demo on GitHub. And if you have any questions, remarks, please find me on Twitter, find me on email, find me in the hallway after the session. I really appreciate all your feedback, so also please give feedback through the app or in person preferably. Thank you.